In 1918, a flu virus killed 50 million people worldwide. As of April 11, 2020, a flu virus is killing hundreds of thousands of people worldwide and still counting. NBC News New York reported on December 17, 2006, about the survivors who remember 1918 global flu pandemic, which report states that at the height of the flu pandemic in 1918, William Sardo Jr. remembers the pine casket stuck in the living room of his family's house, a funeral home in Washington, D.C. The city had slowed to a near halt. Schools were closed, church services were banned. The federal government limited its hours of operation. People were dying. Some who took ill in the morning were dead by night. That's how quickly it happened, said Sardo, 94, who lives in an assisted living facility just outside the nation's capital. They disappeared from the face of the earth. Sardo is among the last survivors of the 1918 flu pandemic. Their stories offer a glimpse at the forgotten history of one of the worst plagues, when the virus killed at least 50 million people and perhaps as many as 100 million. More than 600,000 people in the United States died of what was then called Spanish influenza. The flu seemed to be particularly lethal for otherwise healthy young adults, many of whom suffocated from the buildup of liquids in their lungs. In the United States, the first reported cases surfaced at an army camp in Kansas as World War I began winding down. The virus quickly spread among soldiers at U.S. camps and in the trenches of Europe. It paralyzed many communities as it circled the world. In the District of Columbia, the first recorded influenza death came on September 21, 1918. The victim, a 24-year-old railroad worker, had been exposed in New York 4 days earlier. The flu swept through the nation's capital, which had attracted thousands of soldiers and war workers. By the time the pandemic had subsided, at least 30,000 people had become ill and 3,000 had died in the city. Flu made everybody afraid. Among the infected was Sardo, who was 6 years old at the time. He remembers little of his illness, but recalls that his mother was terrified. "They kept me well separated from everybody," said Sardo, who lived with his parents, 2 brothers, and 3 other family members. His family quarantined him in the bedroom he had shared with his brother. Everyone in the family wore masks. The city began shutting down. The federal government staggered its hours to limit crowding on the streets and on street cars. Commissioners overseeing the district closed schools in early October, along with playgrounds, theaters, vaudeville houses, and all places of amusement, dances, and other social gatherings were banned. The commissioners asked clergy to cancel church services because the pandemic was threatening the machinery of the federal government. The Washington Star newspaper reported at the time pastors protested. There was a feeling that they couldn't turn to God other than in prayer, Sardo said. They liked the feeling of going to church and they were forbidden. The flu spread and the ensuing restrictions made everybody afraid to go see anybody, he said. It changed a lot of society, Sardo said. We became more individualistic. At the time, rumors swirled that the Germans had spread the disease, which Sardo did not believe. In a list of 12 rules to prevent the disease spread, the Army Surgeon General wrote that people should avoid needless crowding, open windows and breathe deeply when the air is pure, and wash your hands before eating. One slogan was, "Cover up each cough and sneeze. If you don't, you'll spread the disease." Those who were healthy wore masks when venturing outside. People who were known to be infected were threatened with a $50 fine if they were seen in the public. Sardo remembers people throwing buckets of water with disinfectant on their sidewalks to wash away germs from people spitting on the street. These days, government health officials are trying to build their case for school closings and similar steps during a future flu pandemic by showcasing new research that suggests such measures seem to work during the deadly Spanish flu of 1918. Researchers found that cities like St. Louis, which instituted social distancing at least 2 weeks before flu cases peaked in their communities, had flu-related death rates less than half that of Philadelphia, which didn't act until later. The Whirlwind Historical Research Project, which started in August and was unveiled this month, involved a team of researchers from the University of Michigan and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who combed through health records, newspaper clippings, and other documents from 45 cities. Another finding: the more social distancing measures were used and the longer they were in place, the less severe was the pandemic's effect on a particular city. Wearing masks in public, restricting door-to-door sales, canceling church, and quarantining sick people were among the layers of measures that appeared beneficial. But the researchers acknowledge they've only just begun their analysis and haven't teased out which measures were most effective, and they stop short of saying those steps were the clear-cut reason some cities had lower death rates. A lot of prayers. Another survivor of the 1918 flu pandemic, 99-year-old Ruth Marshall, says she, her two sisters, and a brother came down with what they thought was a cold. Then the fever struck and the illness became severe, she said. Marshall, who lived just steps from the Capitol at the time, said the influenza deaths reported in the newspapers came as a surprise. We never thought we were going to die. We did pretty good, a lot of prayers, she said. Others were not so fortunate. As the death toll started to mount, there was a shortage of coffins. Funeral homes could not keep up. Sardo's father, who owned William S. Sardo & Co., and other funeral home directors turned to soldiers for help embalming and digging thousands of graves. Talk of the threat of another pandemic brings back memories for Sardo, who says he has gotten a flu shot every year they are available. It scares the hell out of me, Sardo said. It does. Shraddha TV, a Buddhist television channel based in Sri Lanka, reported on April 4, 2020, states that historian John M. Barry, who wrote a book on the 1918 flu, said coronavirus is the closest thing he's seen to the Spanish flu in his lifetime. Unlike today, the vast majority of people killed in 1918 were ages 18 to 45. But Barry said, just like today, the government failed to tell people the truth. The biggest mistake in 1918 was the government lied. They lied about everything. We were at war, and they lied because they didn't want to upend the war effort. You had public health leaders telling people this was just the ordinary flu by another name. They simply didn't tell the people the truth about what was happening, John Barry said. The New York Times article dated April 8, 2020 states that China's coronavirus battle is winning, its propaganda fight is not. After the pandemic subsides, whether Beijing is praised or pilloried could determine the fate of its ambitions for global leadership. For months, the Chinese government's propaganda machine had been fending off criticism of Beijing's handling of the coronavirus outbreak, and finally, it seemed to be finding an audience. Voices from the World Health Organization to the Serbian government to the rapper Cardi B hailed China's approach as decisive and responsible. But China could not savor the praise for long. In recent days, foreign leaders, even in friendly nations like Iran, have questioned China's reported infections and deaths. A top European diplomat warned that China's aid to the continent was a mask for its geopolitical ambitions, while a Brazilian official suggested the pandemic was part of China's plan to dominate the world. As the pandemic unleashes the worst global crisis in decades, China has been locked in a public relations tug-of-war on the international stage. China's critics, including the Trump administration, have blamed the Communist Party's authoritarian leadership for exacerbating the outbreak by initially trying to conceal it. But China is trying to rewrite its rule, leveraging its increasingly sophisticated global propaganda machine to cast itself as the munificent, responsible leader that triumphed where others have stumbled. What narrative prevails has implications far beyond an international blame game. When the outbreak subsides, governments worldwide will confront crippled economies, unknown debt tolls, and a profound loss of trust among many of their people. Whether Beijing can step into that void or is pilloried for it may determine the fate of its ambitions for global leadership. I think that the Chinese remain very fearful about what will happen when we finally all get on top of this virus, and there is going to be an investigation of how it started, said Bonnie Glaser, the director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic International Studies in Washington. They're just trying to repair the damage that was done very early on to China's reputation. The crux of China's narrative is its numbers. Since late March, the country has consistently reported zero or single-digit new local infections, and on Wednesday, it lifted its lockdown in Wuhan, where the outbreak began. In all, the country has reported nearly 84,000 infections and about 3,300 deaths, a stark contrast to the United States, which has reported more than 399,000 infections, and Spain and Italy, each with more than 135,000. The numbers prove China insists that its response was quick and responsible, and its tactics a model for the rest of the world. During a visit last month to Wuhan, China's top leader Xi Jinping said that daring to fight and daring to win is the Chinese Communist Party's distinct political character and our distinct political advantage. Chinese officials have specifically compared their response to that of the United States, which has reported dire shortage of testing kits and ventilators. While China set an example and both precious time for the world with huge efforts and sacrifice, as the World Health Organization, foreign leaders, experts, and media say, did a certain country make full use of the time to enhance preparedness? Hua Chunying, a spokeswoman for China's foreign ministry, said last week. While the numbers are core to China's narrative, they have also been perhaps its most vulnerable aspect. Public health experts agree that China is undercounting its victims. The same is true in the United States, Italy, and any country hard hit by the virus. But concerns about China's accuracy are particularly acute, given the government's history of concealing unfavorable news. Caixin, a respected Chinese news magazine, recently reported that a truck driver brought thousands of urns to just one funeral home in Wuhan, thought it was unclear if the urns were used for coronavirus victims only or more broadly. China for weeks also flouted guidance from the World Health Organization, which recommends that countries include asymptomatic patients in their official counts. Officials only began partially reporting them on April 1, bowing to public pressure. In addition, American news outlets recently reported that the CIA had been warning the White House since at least early February that China's infection count was unreliable, though the basis for the CIA's skepticism was unclear. And on Sunday, a spokesman for Iran's health ministry joined the chorus calling China's reported numbers a bitter joke. Chinese officials have called the accusations immoral slanders. They suggested that the United States was casting doubt on China to distract from the fact that American officials had also ignored early warnings from experts. We sympathize with Americans as they are facing a severe situation, and I can imagine why some in the United States are trying so hard to shift the blame, Ms. Hua said. While China's propaganda might usually be dismissed as just that, especially in developed democratic countries, the errors in those countries' response have allowed it to gain more of a toehold than usual, said Yanshong Huang, who leads the Global Health Center at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. The complacency, the lack of action, the efforts to downplay the seriousness of the problem by our own governments, we've seen this development actually help China to make a strong case that they are not the cause of the problem, he said. It is also true that the Chinese government's strict top-down response helped stop the outbreak more successfully than in many other countries, experts said. And some of its efforts to defend its response are justified. When the Wuhan lockdown was first imposed, overseas public health experts and policymakers called it draconian and doomed to fail. But many have since concurred that, in the absence of widespread testing, a cure or a vaccine, harsh restrictions on people movement are key to slowing transmission. Beijing has leaned into that approbation in its propaganda push, saying it promptly alerted the world to the threat of the virus, but its narrative is oversimplified, leaving out the ways in which it played down the epidemic. In January, Ms. Hua was comparing it to the flu and accusing the United States of fear-mongering when it began evacuating citizens from Wuhan. When Italy suspended flights to and from China, a senior Chinese official summoned the Italian ambassador to criticize the overreaction. In early February, Ms. Hua was already announcing that China had effectively contained the cross-border spread of the virus, a position echoed by Chinese state media. Italy and the United States are now among the countries hardest hit by the virus, and China in late March decided to seal its own borders, barring practically all foreigners and leaving even Chinese citizens with little way to get home. Even some of China's less heavy-handed attempts to claim global leadership have drawn scrutiny. Though China says it has supplied medical equipment to 120 countries, officials in Italy have said that many of the so-called gifts are actually exports. Other countries have complained of faulty test kits and masks. The European Union's top diplomat Joseph Borrell warned in an unusually blunt blog post that China was seeking to use the politics of generosity to undermine European solidarity. The China's messaging push has drawn such forceful reactions from some world leaders speaks in part to its strength. While other countries' bungled responses have amplified its message, China's global propaganda machine has also grown increasingly sophisticated. The government has invested billions of dollars into its foreign media presence, producing sleek videos that are not obviously the work of the Chinese government. When Cardi B praised China's containment measures, she cited a documentary about the lockdown in Wuhan, which many have suggested was a piece produced by the state-run China Global Television Network with English narration and subtitles. And while China's propaganda efforts have drawn criticism from some foreign officials, others have remained silent. Countries may be especially reluctant to antagonize China now, given it is the world's largest manufacturer of desperately needed medical gear, gifted or exported, said Steve Chang, director of the China Institute of the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Some critics have already backtracked. After a furious response from the Chinese ambassador to Iran, the Iranian official who called China's numbers a joke tweeted that China's support of Iran would never be forgotten. The Brazilian official who accused China of maneuvering for world domination later deleted his Twitter post, which had also mocked Chinese actions after similar backlash. China is the biggest trading partner for both Iran and Brazil. If other countries manage to bring their outbreaks under control, they may begin pushing harder against China's narrative, said Professor Wang from Seton Hall University. But China, recognizing the stakes, is unlikely to back down. History is unfortunately written by the victor, and the coronavirus outbreak is no exception, he said. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe on my YouTube channel at Lay the Travel Enthusiast so you can be updated. Thank you.